I'd like to ask our speakers to come back to the stage for a conversation. And I would also like to introduce this panel's moderator. Dawn Ades of the University of Essex is a fellow of the British Academy, a trustee of the Tate Museum, and was awarded an OBE in 2002 for her services to art history. She has curated several important international exhibitions over the past 30 years, including Dada and Surrealism Reviewed, Art in Latin America, and Francis Bacon, and has published important works on photomontage, Dada, Surrealism, women artists, and Mexican muralists.
Hello.
Okay.
I don't know. Is that working?
Sorry. It's quite loud.
Okay, good.
Amazing.
Well,
Very French.
extremely minimal. Well, Rebecca, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank our two speakers for two extremely rich and very interesting papers, which seem to me to intersect at certain points. And I'd just like to think for a moment, or ask you both perhaps individually to comment on those intersections. One is a point that Amy was making towards the end of your paper, that Parlin was very aware of the current state of scholarship, as it were, and knowledge about the pre-Columbian civilizations. Mm-hmm. And it does seem to me that some of the Surrealist journals at the time were actually among those that were actually publishing some of the most recent discoveries. Is
That's
that
right.
Yes. View as well as
Yes.
or dying,
well,
sorry.
I don't know about View. I can't recall anthropological. There again, it was the poetry of anthropology or the poetry of physics rather than the scholarship itself, and that was the big distinction between Parlin and the others, was that he called for an end to what he called metaphysics, to poeticization of science, in his own words. Even though he himself was still, for quite a long time I believed that he had actually met his own mandate to move beyond mysticism and metaphysics. He was an idealist too. In the end, he was, but it was of necessity, as Rita talked about, the ravage of, the horror of war and the displacement and the exile, disorientation, all of that required a kind of, positive outlook on the future, a hope for the future, and that was the idea of the possible, and to be able to continue, to move on, to move forward in spite of everything.
Yes. It was very, I think that what was known of the pre-Columbian civilizations very often provided a kind of analogy or metaphor for what was going on in Europe. And it was quite frequent, Rita mentioned this, and it was, I thought that you were saying that the Maya were very often equated with the Greeks and civilization, because then I think the understanding was that they didn't perform human sacrifice, which subsequent archaeology has changed, as it all started to unravel.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that the Aztec were sometimes equated with the Egyptians, and I also remember in Eric Thompson's work, he writes much more explicitly, equating the Aztec with the German, with sort of militarists from the north. He calls them grim militarists from the north. Which is curious.
And it's in Pere's idea too, also.
Yes.
That there was the cult of the hero in a political system, which you could actually equate to what was happening with the Soviet Union. As you know, he was not a Stalinist at all, and in the Hitler regime. And I think also the interest of Octavio Paz's article or text called Criticism of the Pyramid has to do with this, because he also goes into the analysis of who inherited the political system, the sort of cult of the hero, and I don't think you say barbarianism, but you understand what I mean.
I think you can.
And he says it was not Asia, it is in the West, it is in the Inquisition, it is in the, he continues with that. So I think that this was a point of meeting between, I would say, Perez's analysis of the whole thing and the inheritance in Mexico of this kind of thought that could be taken by an interesting thinker and poet like Paz after. Well, it is a long discussion, but it comes from Perez. That's what I wanted to show. It
Yes.
comes from Perez.
No, it is a long discussion, and you pointed several times at some very important ideas and publications that sort of lie behind both Perret and Westheim. Bataille and Einstein in Document.
Yes. Yes.
And in a sense, they represent these two
We
opposite.
all owe it to you and your translations.
Well, I just wondered if you would like to say a little bit more about what Perret was saying. I'm not saying it's identical to Bataille.
No, I think
But,
I think there is a difference. I think Perret has a very clear political language condemning sacrifice. There's no doubt about that. He thinks that everything that is so powerful and impressive in Aztec art, there is a political, ethical situation where he cannot accept this. And I think the documents too. I'm having trouble with the ears. I am known for having the smallest ears.
I think it's your earring. Isn't it?
It was bent the wrong way. The other one? Oh, right.
It's good because then I don't have to talk. Sorry for time. No, I think your question is for me very important because I do find a difference. I think that the point of view, and I know you have recently written on the meaning of sacrifice in L'Amérique perdue, and I know that very well because we have the same friends, so we same surrealist friends. So, but I do think there is a difference because for Perret, there's always the political question, the ethical question is always there. And L'Amérique perdue was written in 1928, and the fascination with the fact that these pieces, with their aesthetics and their power, could be like combat images. Combat images for what? To destroy Western aesthetics. There was not enough in regard to this question of barbarity, and there was not enough vision that this could be related to totalitarianism. You had to go through the war to see that. And L'Amérique perdue is written in 1928, and Perez starts writing this kind of text in 43, 47. So I think there is a difference. The ethics of what would happen if you would follow hallucination and all the principles that were sort of put forward in Document by Einstein and Bataille, I think there is a different political position to these things in Peru. And I would very much like you, not now, but perhaps later on, we must discuss this. It's very important for me to hear your point of view.
It's very important, and it's important for Paz, it's important for the subsequent
Because
history of-
Peru became a point of reference of a critical position against violence, I would say. But at the same time, what is very disturbing and fascinating too is the attraction with not with violence itself, but with the paraphernalia of violence, the blood, the ritual, all this.
Yeah, Pollen had a whole different take on it.
Sorry.
It's okay. His politics didn't address it head on. It addressed it more in a way more classically, maybe ironically, because he said that that this whole idea of dualism and dialectics was an impossible platform to look at things that way in the light of 20th century's concepts of I just read yesterday something about a multi-universe theory that has just emerged. And he talked about things in terms of complementaries rather than oppositions or dualistic constructions. And but he was, equally concerned about the problems, but the violence for him was not an attraction. What was an attraction for him was the way that ancient and aboriginal or primordial peoples dealt with realities, with realities. It is much more abstract.
Mm. I think we now have an opportunity to open the debate to the audience. So I would invite you to put your hands up if you have a question for either of our speakers. It's the first there. Oh, the first there. Sorry, you've got the microphone first, and then Kent.
This is a question. Am I on? This is a question for Amy Winter. I'm wondering how you think that the cosmogon images relate to Breton's concept of the great invisibles.
They definitely do. And in the same way, the whole context of surrealism, Pollen really didn't break with it entirely. But his concept of the cosmogons was more posited, I think, on science than on Hermeticism and alchemy. And I mean, they both, that's something that actually stopped me trying to figure out these kinds of weird, wild, crazy images. Where are these coming from? But I think they are related because of the idea of the fourth dimension and concepts of what we now think about as parallel universes, and what I just said about multi-universes. And physics has come a tremendous long way. And I think that they were intuiting those things at that time, but expressing them artistically and poetically. And so they come off looking to us like a little bit, a little bit cartoony or not serious, but I think they were generated by their intuition of science's understanding of what we, with our senses, in my book, I talk a lot about the whole philosophical debate between cognition versus sensory reception. And I think one of the things that, Breton and Surrealists and all of them felt was, time and again they said, this tremendous spiritual power or power of primitive art, of ritual art. It's there in those things. And that primordial man somehow was connected because probably of his senses and no blockage through the intellect, more to the energies of things.
Kent. So, one moment. Kent first, and then you. Oh.
The fact that Surrealists played games and had parties, and that was a big part of it, and wrote poetry on the instant, you know. Someone would go out of the room and come back, and there'd be a whole thing, you know, going on. That would have been beautiful if it had been recorded, but it never was.
Yeah, would have.
we will have some of the poetry this afternoon.
You do have documents of it.
We will have some poetry, but
I don't have any documents of it all. It's all in my memories, you know. And for instance, you know, seeing that skull, the crystal skull, he always carried it in his pocket when we crossed the border from the Mexican-American border. And he always touched it as he crossed it. Now, what was that about? It was the magic of it. And walking through a museum with Pollen was an experience because he reacted to everything he saw, especially the ethnic museum in New York. But
well, thank you. We're very honored to have you with us today.
Just a comment about the games. I talked to Gordon Onslow Ford, and he showed me a notebook with a lot of scraps of paper that these people had produced at his house in Pátzcuaro. Yeah. He kept the documents.
he kept all those things.
Yeah.
I know he was a very dear friend. We were together in Mexico too, and he was the first to go to New York, and we lived.
Sorry, we can't hear.
No, this is fine. Well, I'm sorry. Thank you. This is my son, by the way. Daniel drove Pollen around in Mexico because Pollen never learned to drive. And so Daniel, at 18, went down and spent much time with Pollen. He was the one. We were in Rome when Pollen committed suicide, and he was the one that sent us the terrible message that he had died in Tasco. He had killed himself in Tasco. So that's.
I just want to say one more quick thing in response. The big difference between cosmogons and the great transparents, the great invisibles, Pollen thought that it wasn't metaphysics. It wasn't some kind of, right? It was reality of science and related to the idea of sensory perception and so forth, and what we call paranormal perception. He didn't think that it was paranormal.
Okay, I think the guillotine has now come down. Yes. Coffee is waiting, and we will reconvene at midday.